My favorite.
It's Judd's Hockey Show.
No, I mean, I don't want to go into details right now. Actually, it's the second day now in the camp right now. So for me, it's just to look forward, just excited to get going. To be a normal full 82 seasons. So that's just my focus right now to this season.
How was the process? Like, was it frustrating or a one-year deal? Do you like that or not? How do you feel about 1 year?
Yeah, no, I like it. I mean, it's a great opportunity, for me to do another great year, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Oh boy, Judd's Hockey Show, Zolgad, Declan Goff, and that was Kevin Fiala talking about the 1-year contract that he signed while Joel Eriksson rewarded with the first 8-year contract for an internal re-signing in Wild franchise history. Kirill Kaprizov settles on 5 years, 5 times $9 million per season. A lot of people, Declan Goff, rewarded in recent years, rewarded this offseason, and Kevin Fiala, who can score goals, ends up getting a 1-year contract. And you could tell that while he was being diplomatic as possible in the clip that you just played, he's not too pleased about it. I did hear behind the scenes that while he didn't think he should be paid like Kirill, he thought that he should be paid close to Kirill, and he's nowhere near Kirill in terms of money and length. So this is going to be very intriguing because it does seem that we are going to have a very motivated Kevin Fiala on our hands to start the 21-22 season. And I know that you love him when, to quote you, he is pissed off. He certainly seems like he is there. So how do you feel about, I don't know, he's probably not your favorite player on the team because Kaprizov probably is, but one of your favorite players being sort of the odd man out in a contractual situation?
Actually, I would say Kevin Fiala is my favorite player. Kirill Kaprizov's a better player. That's obvious. Not a hot take. But I like what Kevin Fiala brings. We'd had this conversation when he finally signed the 1-year tenure about a month or two ago, and he was going to come in pissed off and probably upset and looking around and looking at his statistics saying, what else more can I prove to you? I've scored more goals. I've been the quote-unquote game breaker that the now fired former general manager dubbed him. I've produced for you. And how come I can't get the contract that Joel Eriksson gets? Of course, you're not going to get the same money as Kaprizov, but he still gets a long-term deal. I understand his frustration. I think he's going to come in with his hair on fire. I think he's going to be upset. And yes, I love me an angry Kevin Fiala. And I think it's going to show. Now, we're going to get into it here in a little bit, but I think with the way, at least overreacting to line combinations, which is one of our favorite things to do on this show. I know some people think it's not fun to react and overreact or underreact to line combinations. It's a staple of Judd's Hockey Show. If you're discovering us for the first time on our YouTube channel, we love wild line combinations. This is one of our staple topics. And just judging by how Fiala is being used in practice with his line mates, I think it's, again, indicative that they just don't view him in the same lens that I do. And of course, those guys are smarter than me, know a hell of a lot more than hockey than I ever will. Yep. But it is interesting to me that where he's being placed on these lines and him not getting a long-term deal and not having the same faith that other players have, I think it's very telling of where he's being placed so far in practice.
Before we get to the lines, do we need to, from what you just said, Declan, do we need to accept the fact that they very well might be right and we're just wrong here? Because ordinarily, lots of times, I think there have been times where hockey ops or baseball ops or football or basketball are wrong, and that they make the mistake, and that we say, why didn't you give this guy a long-term contract? Why didn't you sign this guy? Why didn't you do this or that? In the case of Fiala, there seems to be a very clear feeling between Bill Guerin, Evison, who, by the way, has coached Kevin for a long time, going back to his time with Nashville's minor league affiliate in Milwaukee. There seems to be a very universal feeling on this club, at least among the chief decision makers, that he is who he is, and he's not a guy who's worth giving a long-term contract to. And at this rate, if he has a good year, he's going to be restricted again. but it certainly does not look like, unless he really changed his game, that he would be signed to a long-term deal. So do we need to start accepting the fact that what we think we see, which is a guy that can definitely score goals and generate offense, is simply not enough to reward him with the contract he thinks he deserves, which is probably, in fairness, a star player contract? Because just the last thing, this team cap-wise for the next 3 years after this is going to be in no position to pay Fiala if he is operating at star level status.
I think it was a bad gamble to take this risk. I think you should have paid him when you could. And I know the salary cap ramifications that kick in with these buyouts. I think they're going to be wrong on this. If Fiala is going to perform how he's performed the last 2 abbreviated seasons, he's going to outprice them. He just simply is.
They can't afford him.
And I think
right.
That's going to be a mistake from the Wild side. He's going to be an RFA, so if you do trade him again, his rights in the offseason or something goes wrong in the regular season that you want to explore at a deadline, and he's playing the way he is, hey, you might actually get a return for him. I'm not ready to have that conversation yet either. But to answer your question, are we wrong? No, I don't think. It's one of the few times I think I'm right. This is one of the few times, and I'm a stubborn guy, but I really think the Wild are making a very calculated risk here that it's going to lean towards a mistake that you didn't pay him when you should have this summer.
And they are, as far as I can figure out, simply saying he's not a complete player enough to get the contract he wants.
And I get that, but
that's their contention.
Yes.
Is that Kirill is far more of a complete player. So Kirill's flashy and fun to watch, but what they see is a player that does far more all over the ice than Kevin does.
Look, you have to take the bad with the good there, and Kevin Fiala is dynamic. They eventually awarded Matt Dumba for having not atrocious, but being a liability, and sometimes still can be a liability defensively, but they see the offensive upside and they say, oh, it's worth it, or it's risk, or it offsets, and or he can even develop his game on the other end. They're making the assumption that you're not going to make that. You're not going to make that adjustment on the other end. You're going to still make penalties. You're going to take dumb penalties. You're going to make defensive miscues. And look, Kevin, yes, clean that up, but in my opinion, it's worth the risk. The dude's a dynamic goal scorer. This franchise needs dynamic goal scorers.
Yeah,
I don't think he has a tendency to take nights off either. He might be a streaky player from the box score standpoint. To me, he doesn't seem like a guy that takes a night off. And I think it's going to be a calculated risk to just let him possibly walk away from you because you weren't able to pay him this summer.
All right, let's get to it. It's time for line combinations. I've got those right here.
Bumper or like a
line
song or
combinations. Something. I have no fear. You're right. We love to talk. Training camp's a week old, and we are talking lines. You know why? Because lines are fun to talk about. And if you don't think so, you're probably watching the wrong show. Sorry about that. All right, I will run through them.
Yep.
These are the first line combinations that we got. If they have been tweaked or changed in camp, which they probably have been, we'll get those to you. But these are the initial impression combinations, okay? There are definitely some things that are going to be works in progress here. But it's interesting. And let's go through these line by line. Start with the first line, okay, Dex? It's interesting that the first line, which I think this is the plan. This is the plan, unless it all goes wrong. Joel Eriksson Ek in that new contract at center. Zuccarello on the right wing, Kaprizov on the left wing. So 2 guys in Kaprizov and Zuccarello who developed really quick and great chemistry together. Now not playing with Victor Rask, now not playing with Ryan Hartman, but playing with Ek. Your thoughts on that proposed first line?
Let's try it out. It is the best possible first line you can come up with, I think, in terms of combinations. Just in terms of your center and the wingers on the side. Zuccarello and Kaprizov were money last year when they were together. Ek, although has a good defensive game and scored more goals. Our friend of the show, Bill Guerin, even disagreed with me that he says he does have flashierness to his game. He does have the ability to score sexier goals. You have to see if this guy's a number 1 center. And a lot of fans were asking him to be the number 1 center last year, and we're going to see if this is the case. I think when you just boil it all down, it makes sense to put him and Kaprizov and Zuccarello together. So this is your ifdo de facto top line. Is it a number 1 line on elite teams? Probably not. but it's the number one line on this team, and I want to see what Joel Eriksson can do without being in that checking line role. And I wouldn't be surprised, and line combination, which always change, which is why we love talking about them, that Ek in a crunch time situation might be paired back again with a Greenway and a Foligno in a defensive responsibility role. But in general, let's see what Ek can do with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, who are arguably two of the best playmakers on this team.
The thing I like about this line is it doesn't have to be flashy from three players. Ek's going to bring a defensive presence. Ek is a great two-way player. Like, he's really good there. And I think the problem is we as fans, and I am guilty of this for sure. I think back to the North Stars days of Broughton, Cicerelli, McCarthy. And that's back when a center had to be sort of flashy and, oh man, look at that, look at that. This game now dictates more that the center in this case be really solid. And Ek doesn't need to be, to your point, flashy. He needs to be solid. He needs to be sound defensively, which I think he is always going to be. He needs to facilitate, but it doesn't need to be sexy, great plays. It doesn't need to be drop passes. It just needs to be the ability to make plays that make Kaprizov and Zuccarello look good. But let me also get into what we talked about with Bill Guerin last week, because he talked about this last year and again last week. And I find this to be perhaps the most interesting thing in the evolution of this sport. It used to be the wingers needed the center to set them up. Like I'm on the wing, pass me the puck. I'm going to the front of the net. I'll get a greasy goal. Kirill Kaprizov is, for lack of a better term, a positionless forward. He has the ability to do things centers do, which to go back to, I think a McCarthy or a Dino, they were wingers. They were flat out. Dino made plays that a winger makes. Kirill Kaprizov. I mean, Dex, look, your guy, Zuccarello. Yeah. He's a facilitator too.
He's a facilitator, yes.
Like he sets up Kaprizov as back in the day a center would. So I'm really intrigued by this line because I think we have notions of the center's going to do this and that. And we need to get with the program of 2021, which is this line offers intrigue because you could argue here it's sort of a positionless line, Declan.
Yeah, I liked that, how Bill explained that with us, that the center is no longer the old school center. The left wing is not the left wing. All these guys are now becoming playmakers. You saw, Kirill Kaprizov, just by playmaking, made Ryan Hartman look like a top six center last year, when Ryan Hartman is a bottom six guy. And by the way, a good bottom six guy. I don't mean that as a slight to him. He's a solid role player in the NHL who have a nice career. But he made Ryan Hartman look like a top six center because he was a facilitator and because he was a playmaker. Yes. Zuccarello is not going to be a guy who's going to shoot the puck a ton. I think he should, but his bread and butter, and when he was with the Rangers and with his now couple seasons with the Wild, it's being a playmaker. And it's no longer just, hey, I want the number one center. And Billy hates when he's asked about that. I hear him that we've been deprived of it for the entire history of this franchise. But it's more of having playmakers now. Kevin Fiala can be a playmaker. You have other players who can step into roles, and it's not just, hey, here's your position, here's the tunnel vision, and here's the focus of what we need from you. It's the game evolves. The game evolves from
it's basketball, right?
Yes,
point guards aren't point guards now. Point guards are a lot of things.
And the game evolves in weird fashion sometimes. At the beginning of the decade when the Kings were winning cups, it was all about size and goaltending. And then all of a sudden these little guys like Johnny Gaudreau pop up and it's smaller guys. And then all of a sudden it transitions back to being thick and being bigger and being tall. And now you have also guys who are just no longer centers and wings. They're all playmakers and they're all trying to accomplish the same thing. It just goes to show that the game evolves. The game evolves from past tendencies, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
And players have improved too.
Yeah.
So like you now have, especially I think when you're talking top six forwards, you have guys now with tremendous skill and talent. And I'm not saying that they didn't 25 years ago, but it wasn't the same. Like the speed of the game now and the ability to handle the puck, right? There's so many things that a guy like Kaprizov, Patrick Kane has always struck me as, yes, great goal scorer, but he can make plays too. And so it's really changed. Okay, let's get to, so from a positive, because I think that line actually works, and I'm excited to see it. So let's get from that positive to what might be a patented Goff meltdown. More so from you than me. But the second line that I've got jotted down in my notes here is newcomer, former Predator and Penguin, and a guy that played with Kevin Fiala at one time and actually had, I think, in a playoff run, pretty good chemistry and success.
He did. Yeah,
Frederick Gaudreau at center. And I don't think that's where you're going to melt down. Kevin Fiala on the right wing, I believe he would be. I'm not positive. It might be the left wing. And Victor Rask moving from center to wing. So this is an initial line, subject to change. Put an asterisk by it, Declan. Calm down. Take your blood pressure meds. Gaudreau, Fiala, and Rask.
It's atrocious. I don't really. If you're holding your hat on that, number one, let's start with Gaudreau before I even get to the other guy on that line. Mm-hmm. With Fiala and Gaudreau having a decent little chemistry and by the way, as the hashtag sample size goes, small sample size. It wasn't like they were playing together all season. It was like 56, 75. It was not a lot of minutes logged together.
Right.
Yes, it was solid in the limited amount of time, but Frederick Gaudreau, Judd, has played like 55 NHL games since 2019.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a bottom six guy.
Like, I think it's a mistake to just assume that that Frederick Gaudreau can just step in and be a center who's going to play 15 minutes a night. Yeah. I think what they look at here is like, and this is where maybe it works, and maybe I can be completely wrong. Gaudreau wins faceoffs. This team couldn't win a faceoff to save its life last year. Again, smaller sample size, but Gaudreau does win faceoffs. Victor Rask even can win a faceoff. I think he's a complete liability with a couple bricks in his skates outside of that, but he can win a faceoff. So if Gaudreau gets kicked out, you can put in Victor Rask. But that shouldn't be the reason why Victor Rask should be playing alongside Kevin Fiala. I also believe that Rask is not a great defensive player. Fiala is obviously not a great defensive player. This one to me, this is confusing to me. To be honest, I believe this is where you would slide Rossi in. If Rossi's ready to rock, Fiala and Rossi, I'll take whatever's on the left side. If that's Victor Rask, all right, just Victor, don't screw things up. If Rossi is plugged in here, I'm all in on this. I love this. I want to see what Rossi and Fiala can do. I don't care what he did with Gaudreau 3 years ago, and for a guy that's basically played less than 55 games in the last 2 years. And you could say, well, Declan, Marco Rossi hasn't played an NHL game. Marco Rossi's an 8th overall pick and has a high pedigree and is most likely going to have a hell of a better career than Frederick Gaudreau does entering his late 20s. You need Marco. I want to see what Marco Rossi can do at this line. In general, if this, with Fiala, Gaudreau, Rask, if that is indeed a line on opening night, it doesn't stand a goat's chance in hell of staying together. Everyone's going to get in the doghouse. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, I'm not a fan at all of Rask being on that line, and I don't think that will stay that way. But I think you're right. I think this is so. Gaudreau's there right now because he's a veteran who is probably incredibly responsible. And I think Dean wants that. Dean covets the ability to show the kids, hey, watch how this guy goes about his business. He's not a star, but he, can win a face-off. He is good in his defensive zone, which I'm guessing Gaudreau is at this point in his career. But this strikes me as 100% a placeholder for Rossi and or Sturm. They clearly have a thing with Sturm where they want him to earn everything he possibly gets. And I think he's a cocky kid, so that's why. But again, yes. Last year, I was surprised that Nico Sturm didn't get more opportunities because he has more talent than a Rask. But what they'll come back and tell you is, yeah, he might have more talent, but he's not responsible. And Rask is responsible. He's just not really a fun player to watch. So we go back and forth here. But I mean, that line to me, it's very Dean-like. That's a very Dean line. And I think that Marco Rossi is going to be given every chance to make this roster. And Bill Guerin made it very clear that if he makes this roster, he's going to play. He's not a fourth line guy. So I think you might be onto something as far as the Gaudreau factor being a placeholder spot right now for Rossi or Sturm, and my guess is Rossi. And keep in mind too, Gaudreau is essentially replacing Bonino, who ended up, I think, as a fourth line wing, and he was effective. Like I liked how he played, But
For
I
sure.
think Goudreau is the Bonino replacement. So I don't think that there's this to me is a training camp. Hey, he is responsible. Watch him play. But the reality is, I really believe there's a top 6 job, and it's not with the first line initially, for Marco Rossi to win here. So like this doesn't get me too bent out of shape, because I would have been very surprised if opening day of camp they said, Marco Rossi, you are our second
Sure.
line center. I think this is more of a feeling out, and probably fairly smart too. You need to see exactly what Rossi can do returning from essentially, the year off because of the COVID scare, and also he's just new. So I think the Eck line is real. Like I think that's the desired line. I think that second line of Goudreau, Fiala, and Rask is just sort of a feeling out line. But I mean, they've also, in fairness, and we talked about this last year, they also certainly have come up with combinations that have not put Fiala in the position to succeed that probably both of us think he deserves.
Absolutely. I mean, Frederick Goudreau is going to be a guy who mostly likely only plays like, again, 55 games or so in a season. He's going to be a healthy scratch every once in a while.
He's a
like unless I'm proven completely wrong and he is this damn good player.
No,
he's an in and out of the lineup kind of guy.
I bet he plays a lot. I really think ideally they see him as Nick Bonino too.
Yeah.
So he plays a ton.
And I do think he'll end up playing.
Keep in mind
more than he should.
What Bill told us last week is very interesting in the sense that the thing I like is he's pretty upfront. And what he told us last week about Rossi and fourth line, and look, if Marco Rossi makes this team, he's going to be a top 6 guy. Nick Bonino didn't get scratched. He played a ton, but he didn't play a ton in games, if that makes sense. So like his games played. So I think Goudreau, he's the type of guy that you sign because everybody knows his role. Where if you keep Rossi and then he plays fourth line minutes, which is not a ton, that holds him back. Goudreau, you're not concerned about that, right? So I think between Dean and Bill, there's probably a very clear initiative here. Frederick Goudreau is going to play a ton of games. He's not going to play a ton of time in those games.
It's accurate.
Third line, I actually like. I think this works fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
And this is why the Eck, and I know that these three were great together, but this is why the Eck move to me is a no-brainer. Ryan Hartman, Foligno, Greenway.
Yeah.
That's a perfect third
This
line.
is a hockey line.
And it's going to be, and I mean, those are 3 guys that are going to work their ass off. The reality is this.
Yes.
Because I agree with your statement. I mean, Joel Eriksson Ek is not a flashy player, but he's a really talented player. Hartman is just a hard work.
Yeah.
God bless him. Works his ass off.
Good for him. Yeah.
But yeah, that third line is a hockey line. That's a matchup line. I like at least 2 of those 3. We'll talk about why Jordan Greenway might be in the doghouse. But yeah, I'm with you. That line to me is a line that you have on a winning team.
Yeah, this will be your most responsible defensive line, easily. Foligno has morphed into a very, very solid player. Ryan Hartman's a very good role player. I know you have a bone to pick with Jordan Greenway, but there is still maybe something to be unlocked there. I know Mountain Zolgad is already boiling just with me saying those words.
The head coach.
But I like what they bring defensively. Yes, they're going to be probably a shutdown line. Wouldn't shock me if sometimes Eck gets plugged into there every once in a while if it's a key face-off or key moment in a game and late in crunch time. But in general, this is your most responsible defensive line. You need this line. You need this line to be effective. And I like it. Yeah, I'm with you. It's not going to be flashy. It's not going to be sexy. But it's going to shut down opposing lines. And yeah, they might be. Maybe. If you get in a good breakaway, you can absolutely score some goals. But yes, it's going to be a strong defensive line.
Okay, fourth line is training camp opened, so this is very fluid. Okay.
Yeah.
Sturm at center, Nick Bukestad at right wing, and then they had a placeholder prospect at left wing, which was really Boldy's job. And Boldy again is not going to be a fourth line guy. So Boldy is going to move up. So here's what I think happens. Okay. I think in their perfect world, and by the way, this is a little bit scary because of their age, and I don't know that they're really prepared completely for this assignment in this league. But
Mhm.
I think that second line in a perfect world, as things progress, is Rossi, Boldy, Fiala. And I'm going to tell you why. Putting Rossi and Boldy together is a risk,
Oh,
but they have chemistry. And I saw it in that prospects game against the Blackhawks. And I'm not saying that's an opening night line, okay? So don't get me wrong here. But I'm just telling you that that when I saw those two play together, they have chemistry, and Rossi is a facilitator, and Rossi
yeah.
is really talented, and Boldy's talented and big and a hard worker. And I think if you got that with Fiala, and I think Rossi also, I think he's really good. Like I think he is the real deal. That threesome at some point in time intrigues me. It might be more than Dean and Bill can do from a defensive liability standpoint, but it really, I mean, you talk about some offensive punch, Declan Goff.
Yeah, dude.
That intrigues me. And Boldy would need to be the most responsible wing for sure. But just think about that.
Yeah, I like that. I love that idea. It will take massaging, and it'll take probably something else for that line to be constructed. But it's definitely a fun line to come up with. And again, which is why we love talking about wild line combinations, because this is the idea of this sounds awesome. Sounds like a fun idea on paper. And are all three of those guys probably as responsible defensively? No, probably not. Probably not. It's a big ask to assume Boldy and Rossi as rookies are. You know, Kevin Fiala hasn't found that part of his game really, even though he has more of the experience than those two. I love that idea. I would rather see that. And if you are daydreaming, I mean, if you know what you're going to get with Kaprizov, Ek, and Zuccarello. Like I even though Ek is still unknown as being a number one center, I know what I'm getting out of that. If Rossi, Boldy, Fiala, if that is a slam dunk, well, now all of a sudden you have a top six. You have like a legitimate top six, like with skill from the top six down, and your bottom six is defined. Like it's who they are. They're not going to necessarily exceed expectations. They can slide again into that role, and they know what to expect out of them. So the idea of that literally creates a very, very fun and possibly dynamic best top six the Wild could potentially have had in years.
I agree.
In years.
Now let's get to in fact, just for the purposes of keeping track of time here, we're recording this on Wednesday. The Wild plays their second preseason game Wednesday night in Colorado. They played one preseason game. They played it against the Blues. They lost 6-2 in St. Louis on Saturday. St. Louis scored a couple of late goals when it was 4-2, so the score looks more lopsided. But let's get to a line combination that also intrigues me, and I think it might be a tweak, Dex, of what we just talked about, okay?
Okay.
The tweak is this, and this is why Evason on Sunday, when he got back here and talked to the local press, was upset. He had a line out there that was Rossi, Boldy, and Greenway. So the tweak to the line there is Fiala probably, and again, you're not going to like this, but Fiala goes down to the Hartman Foligno line. Greenway comes up because they see him as the veteran, and Boldy and Rossi, I think they want to play together. Now, here's the problem. In that game, first preseason game, okay? But Jordan Greenway, no shots, a -1, and Dean's quote on Sunday was, Rossi and Boldy were good, quote, but our veteran guy with them was not. And he also went on to say all of the veterans I played didn't play great, which is probably a smart thing at that time. But it intrigued me that I think what he's looking for and what they're thinking is, can we pair a veteran who we perceive as being more responsible than Fiala with Boldy and Rossi, ergo Greenway. And Greenway sounds like he, I don't know, didn't apply himself. I couldn't watch the game because it was not shown. But long story short, I think that's why Evason was upset at Greenway, because they wanted to see what happens if we put those two, who they like together, with a veteran presence in Greenway. And of course, this comes back to what you said earlier, which is they desperately want Greenway to in some ways grow up and completely apply himself, which he's done at times, but not consistently.
This is where you need to take a a box score statistic and match it up with a quote. Like when you see no shots in a -1, because I plus minus can be also deceiving. Yes. You can see that and say, well, Joe, what the hell? Like it was a preseason game. He logged 15 minutes. He was a -1, no shots. Who cares? But then when you plug in the quote from Dean there, which is, and again, reading between lines, ciphering through coach speak, that no, that's a shot at Jordan Greenway. That's 100. That's not just a hey, yeah. His box score line was, you could probably say you're overreacting, but then when you match it with a quote, it makes a lot of sense. Yes. And Greenway is, and for the lack of a better words, as we don't want him to, but he's Charlie Coyle 2.0. That's our worst case scenario, and it might be trending on the seesaw that he's becoming Charlie Coyle 2.0, and he's not becoming Jordan Greenway. And that's what you don't want to see. They're very similarly built. They have similar pedigrees. I think in the long run, I think Jordan Greenway is going to be a better player than Charlie Coyle was during his career. But here, at least it's not encouraging necessarily. Yeah, I think is the way I would say it.
I goofed too. Jordan was actually a -2 in that game with no shots. Boldy on the same line did not take a shot and was a -3. And Rossi did take 2 shots, didn't get any points, and was a -2. So yeah, I think the frustration there though is when they put a veteran presence with those 2 young players who are their future, and they don't get the desired result from that player. In this case, the veteran. They're not pleased. Now, here's the interesting thing about that game, and it sounds like this guy played really well, and he's a goal scorer. Adam Beckman, 2 goals, 3 shots. If you go back and look at his junior stats, they're very impressive.
Yeah,
he can score. Adam Beckman is going to, I think, make a run at making the roster.
What do you think about that? I don't think he makes the roster. But he is the best prospect on this team, not named Marco Rossi and Matthew Boldy. He is damn good. We kind of forget about him. We kind of forget about him because we're excited for Rossi and Boldy, and Kaprizov's no longer a prospect. I think all things considered, Judd, if I'm manifesting or projecting what happens is Beckman replaces Kevin Fiala down the road. Long term, not just like this season plug and play. Sure. Long term, they think Adam Beckman is capable of being Kevin Fiala's from a production standpoint, and also being obviously a more well-rounded player than Kevin Fiala is. It'd be great to assume that Beckman can also work here with Fiala, with Rossi, with Boldy, with Kaprizov, with all that stuff. But the odds are is all those 3 prospects not all 3 of them are going to hit their high ceiling. It's very rare that the 3 of them are going to hit the 100th percentile of what they have been projected to be. And I think that's where Wild fans get almost sometimes a little blind. It's like, oh, look at our prospect pool. Look at all these prospects. Baseball, and that happens in baseball all the time, more than in hockey. That, oh, look at our top 10 prospect list. The odds are on that top 10 prospect list, 2 are going to hit their ceiling. 2. And the other 5 are going to flame out. And the other 3 left are just going to be nice players. They're never going to be also who they were. So, but to the point about Beckman, not to just crap on him here, because that might sound like I was crapping on him. He looks great. And I think he goes to Iowa and is on the first line, and he's a stud and potentially could find his way into the Wild's roster. I don't think he does make this roster, but he's an exciting player to watch, and because we've been kind of forgetting about him with Rossi and Boldy.
I think he makes a run at it. I think he's gonna. And here's the one thing: the wild card about this whole thing, no pun intended, is because the culture of this team has changed so much. If you earn a spot, I think you make it. Because for how long did we have perceived of, oh man, this guy has to make it. This guy has to make it, right? So the Beckman thing that intrigues me is it would almost be worth keeping him on the roster to reward him, even if he doesn't stick, if he deserves it. And look, that's 1 game. He can score goals, so I don't know. But I do. There's a fine line between saying we don't want to have a young player make the team and play 4th line and get buried, and he just flat out made our team, which for far too long with this franchise has been like, well, you can't make the team. This guy has to make the team because he's friends with Parisi and Suter or whatever. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see how they go about rewarding guys who deserve it, sure. And Bill made it very clear that there are 1 or 2 roster spots open to make this team for that purpose, because the last thing that you want to do as a franchise that certainly has had some struggles in the personality department is be like, oh, all the spots are taken. So you're probably right, but I do think the Beckman thing is worth keeping an eye on if he continues to play well, because I think they're chomping at the bit to reward guys to sort of set a tone of, hey, if you make it, you make it.
Absolutely. Yeah. He'll be a solid player, but I think he starts in Iowa and he hopefully gets off to a bang and eventually maybe does crack the roster.
That makes sense. All right. Next thing. Alternate. They're not assistant. They're alternate captains have been named. Dumba and Foligno, I believe this was last weekend, were named alternate captains over Eriksson Ek, who certainly could have gotten it and deserved it, and Brodin, who again is a marvelous defenseman, incredibly solid for the most part. Let me give you my theory on both, Dex, and then get your reaction to that. Foligno is the all-time no-brainer. He could be captain. In fact, I think if they didn't have so much respect for Spurgeon, that at least the last time that we were allowed to go in that room post-game and stuff, there was no question that the presence was him. Foligno's presence was just incredible. Like, he always stood up and answered questions. Jared's a very, like, I'm sure he's popular, and he might be a whirling dervish when it comes to the captaincy when the locker room door is closed. But Marcus Foligno has always been the spokesman, and to me, largely the heartbeat of this team. So, like, that had to be done. He had to get an A. The Dumba one, I've got a theory about.
Okay, I want to hear it.
Matthew Dumba, to me, I mean, he arrived here as an immature kid. We heard the stories. He was not mature. I don't think he had skills, but I don't think he necessarily knew how to be a professional.
That's exactly what it is.
He also grew up in a locker room that wasn't the best. I'm sorry, but I don't think that there was a lot of direction there. I think there were a lot of people serving their own agendas, which is not the greatest thing, especially in this sport where I do believe a cohesiveness is incredibly important to success. Matthew Dumba has come a long way on and off the ice too. He has done a lot off the ice as far as community work goes, as far as helping people out. He's done a lot of good things. Eriksson Ek or Brodin would have been fine choices. And I would almost argue that Eriksson Ek, because of the contract and who he is as far as a player and a tempo, probably is the more logical choice. But I think that this is a reward to show people, if you do what this kid has done, and Dumba has, I mean, he's grown up from a kid to a man, we're going to recognize that. So yeah. I don't know that he's the greatest choice for this. And look, it's not like he's captain. But my point is, I think that this is more of a Eriksson Ek and Brodin contractually got theirs. They deserved it. Eriksson Ek and Brodin are mature players, so they're not going to pout and moan. Dumba, by being rewarded, it makes a statement that I think is probably important for a lot of people in that franchise to see.
Yeah, he's grown up a ton. He has morphed from a unprofessional to a professional. I remember there was a pretty damning quote from Bruce Boudreau after a game. Dumba had an atrocious game. I think it was a -4.
It was Winnipeg.
Yeah, and I think you were there too, right? Yeah, you were both there. And I think Bruce's line was, "Well, we got a guy here who sometimes doesn't act like a professional," and it was again, reading between the lines, a clear shot at Matt Dumba. And I do think he's grown up a ton. And I also believe he seems to be, just by reading social media stuff and videos that the Wild Entertainment team puts together, he's kind of the pump up guy on that team. He's the guy that gets everyone juiced. And I do think you need also some of that from a captaincy, and Foligno can provide that as well. I think he does it in a more stoic and in a different way. But Dumba's kind of their hype man. Dumba's the one running the music when we went in that locker room. Dumba's the guy who's getting everyone going, and Dollar Bill Kirill. And I do think there's some sort of unquantifiable thing that is important to have also in that room, and also as leaders. Not just like, hey, Dumba, you be the pump up guy. You just be that guy. I also think it comes from a leadership standpoint too. And his teammates recognize that. Guerin and Evison don't seem like the kind of guy who would just hand out an A either. I know mostly the players are going to be the ones who are determining that. That's what they did with Spurgeon. They all voted. They said it was Spurgeon. But what Dumba brings, and that brashness, is an important thing to have. So I understand why he was named an alternate captain.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, last thing. Shout out to listener Nick Werner, who sent me this beauty.
Okay.
Parisi bobblehead. So
Yeah.
if you are watching us right now, you can see Zach with the A. But Nick's like, I'm going to stick this thing in a closet. Do you want it? And I said, absolutely. And you know why?
Thank you,
because
Nick.
it allows me now. Yes, thanks, Nick. It allows me now to proudly present to you the Buyout Brothers. There they are. There they are. Parisi and Suter, alternate captains, the Buyout Brothers bobblehead set, available for a limited time. That's right. It allows me to, and if you are tuning in on the podcast, I apologize. You can't see it, but go watch us on YouTube on the Score North channel. You will see the Buyout Brothers reunited in wild jerseys. Of course, one guy's in Dallas, one guy is on the island, but for right now, they're reunited.
Buyout
Thanks
Brothers.
to Nick Werner. Thank you very much, Nick.
And thank you also to all of our YouTube audience. Again, we've been on a pause here because the wild off season has been going on and there hasn't been much to talk about, but Judd's Hockey Show is back now. So we will be all of our, just like loyal listener Nick there, handing out bobbleheads. If you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, ScoreNorth.com, we appreciate it. And if you're discovering us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Judd and myself will be pumping out it multiple times a week.
This week 3
wild
for
content.
us. It feels
Yeah.
like we started doing them about 2 weeks
Yeah.
ago. Did one last week. But yes, once the season starts, I would say we will average about 2 per week.
Yeah, at least 2 per week.
Minimum.
So
Maybe more.
So you'll be able to get plenty of wild content right here on the Score North YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button.
Awesome. We will talk to you next week, Declan.
Pass, shoot, score.